What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. I'm your host, Hutchinson Brown, and today we've got a fantastic show. It is time to prepare for battle for Week 4 of the 2025 NFL season. I've got some injury updates for you, some questions to answer, my Coming in Clutch and Fudge players of the week, and then we bring on Joey Wright from Football Guys, the community ambassador, fellow football guy, colleague at the Joey Wright on Twitter, to talk about the over-unders with us. It was a fun segment. I already recorded it. Now I'm recording the beginning of the podcast. So let's just jump right in before I get into the show today. Please follow me on Twitter. I'm at HutchinsonB_FF. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you'll be notified every single time a new episode does drop. And don't forget to check out my work over at Football Guys. Make sure you check out the Football Guys team in general. If someone comes up to me and is like, hey, Hutch, I need fantasy football advice, where do I go? I say you can always follow me on Twitter, but if you want to go through our website, Football Guys is the site to go to. Their tools, their sites, the analysts we have over there, all of our premium rankings and articles are just phenomenal. Football Guys does a great job, so make sure you check them out. So without further ado, let's get into the injury updates for today. Starting with the quarterback position, we got a few things to talk about here. We have Jayden Daniels. He missed week 3 with a knee sprain. He could miss week 4, so make sure you have a backup option for Jayden Daniels just in case he were to miss. That backup option could be Marcus Mariota. We talked about it last episode about how Marcus Mariota is not afraid to run the football, and he was totally maintaining this offense pretty well in Washington as the backup. So he's totally a streamable candidate if you need an option to back up Jayden Daniels. Now, looking at Justin Fields for the Jets, he's in the concussion protocol still, has not gotten back to practice in the way we want him to yet. But keep an eye on Thursday and Friday reports. Those are going to be huge. I mean, I'm recording this Wednesday afternoon, so I don't have the full reports yet, all the information possible for the week yet. So Justin Fields, just keep an eye on him. He could be active this week, but he could not. So if he's active, he's startable. He's very, very playable as a low-end QB1, but otherwise, just make sure you have a backup option if Justin Fields is in your starting lineup right now. And then Brock Purdy from the San Francisco 49ers, he almost returned in week 3, wasn't able to do it, could return in week 4. He's expected to. And Brock Purdy back in lineups as a potential QB2 play. Great to see that against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now let's move to the running backs. We have 2 season enders, unfortunately, we talked about on the episode prior, with James Conner and Najee Harris both going to be gone for the season, so you can drop these players. They're not going to be helpful for you in fantasy football anymore, unfortunately. So best of luck to their recovery process over the next, several months to these 2 guys. Very serious injuries, very devastating for these 2 for their NFL careers. Now looking to Tajay Spears, remains on injured reserve with an ankle injury, but is eligible to return in week 5. This is a player I wanted to throw in here. Keep an eye on him. If he were to get involved in this backfield, especially as a receiver, he could have some fantasy relevance. Calvin Ridley struggling. Alec Aminar is fine, but the rest of this receiving core is really not putting up numbers. Tajay Spears is a really good receiver out of the backfield, and Tony Pollard is not showing up in that area of the game. We saw Spears get very fantasy relevant in the last few games of 2024. Cam Moore's not afraid to dump off if you need someone to help with. So I think Tajay Spears could be a really fantasy relevant option. I think he's worth a pickup if he was dropped in your fantasy league. And Zach Charbonnet on track to play in week 4. I don't think he's playable as long as Ken Walker is healthy and playing. So keep playing Ken Walker, and Zach Charbonnet is a good handcuff. And then Tyron Tracy Jr. Suffered a dislocated shoulder, expected to miss multiple weeks. Didn't get placed in IR, which is a good sign for him, but it doesn't seem to matter because it seems like Cam Scadaboo, after a really good Sunday Night Football performance against the Chiefs, is going to be the clear-cut starter for the Giants moving forward. And Football Guys has him ranked as a top 10 running back this week. I am in full agreement with that. I think he should be ranked as a top 10 running back this week. I think he's going to be a very, very good fantasy back for the rest of the season as long as he's healthy. Now, let's talk about wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb sustained a high ankle sprain on that really dumb run play. I ranted about that last episode if you want to see that. Sustained a high ankle sprain in week 3 and is considered unlikely to play in week 4. He was trying to play again in week 3. He was trying to get back on the field, but it just didn't work. I would expect this guy to miss 4 to 6 weeks. That's what the reports have shown, but they've also been a little confusing. There's been multiple reports about his timetable. I would expect about 4 to 6 weeks. I would expect him to be on IR, and I would expect him to not have him in your fantasy lineup for a while. So right now, George Pickens, Jake Ferguson both get little bumps up. Mike Evans, he left week 3 with a hamstring injury, currently undergoing MRIs, a lot of testing. We're seeing multiple reports coming out over the last couple of days about his timetable. I've seen 2 weeks, I've seen 4 weeks, I've seen 5 weeks, I've seen a lot of ranges, but he hasn't been officially placed on IR, which is a really good sign. Hopefully, we see him within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But will he be 100% back when he comes back? Not sure, but we shall see. Now, let's talk about Terry McLaurin. Suffered a quad injury in week 3. I think he's going to be fine. It seems like he's going to play and everything's going to be okay. He should be started as a wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. And now, Chris Godwin, dealing with that ankle injury that he suffered last year that's been holding him out for this season to start. However, his stats for week 4 is becoming a little questionable. It's not fully out, it's questionable, but I don't think he will play. And if he does, do not put him in your starting lineup. Likely for the first 2 weeks when he comes back, he's going to be used completely as a decoy. I mean, I think Emeka Buka is going to flow. I mean, I think the offense will flow through Emeka Buka this week with Mike Evans out. Now, Alec Pierce entered the concussion protocol after sustaining a head injury in week 3, and he's probably not going to play this week. So it gives opportunities for the Colts wide receivers to step up even more. Michael Pittman, maybe in a slash of Adonai Mitchell, where there was some hype for him in the offseason. Maybe we'll see something in his second year this year. And then Tyler Warren as well. All these guys get a little bump up. And then lastly, Xavier Worthy, he's been dealing with that dislocated shoulder that he sustained in week 1, but he's expected to return in week 4. Is he startable in fantasy? Yes, but he's not forced into my lineups. I'm not forcing him there. It's been Tyquan Thornton. That's been fun, but I think this is supposed to be the Xavier Worthy role. I think when he comes back, he is the wide receiver 1 of this offense. And Rashee Rice comes back, maybe gets a little more confusing. But right now, as Rashee Rice is out, Xavier Worthy is in. Xavier Worthy is number 1 wide receiver. And he's very startable in fantasy first week off the injury, but I wouldn't force him in. So I would rank him as like a wide receiver 3/flex play. And then now let's go to the tight end position. George Kittle missed week 3 with a hamstring injury, continues to be on IR. He is still out. Trey McBride had a hip injury. It's not considered super serious, which is great to hear, but he's likely to play. And Seattle is the worst team right now in fantasy points allowed to the tight end position with over 20 points per game. That is only team in the league that's allowing 20 points per game to the tight end position in PPR scoring. So Trey McBride, fire him up, man. Get excited for him. And then Noah Fant was placed in concussion protocol. His status is uncertain for the week. Now, this gives Mike Gesicki potential streaming upside, but with Jake Browning a quarterback, I really don't want to touch that. I think you're looking at Mike Gesicki as maybe a tight end 2 play if you're in a 2 tight end league, but that's the best. And now Isaiah Likely, he missed the first 3 games with a foot injury. His week 4 status is uncertain. It seemed like he almost played in week 3. There were reports saying that he could play. And then last week, we saw Mark Andrews get really involved in the offense. So I think Baltimore is now put in a position where it's like, Mark Andrews is doing well for us. We don't necessarily need to put Isaiah Likely in the lineup if he's not 100% ready. So I would expect Isaiah Likely to potentially miss another week, but watch out. He could definitely come back in week 4. And I wouldn't necessarily start him. I wouldn't put him on my fantasy lineups, but I definitely keep an eye on him because he's a very talented tight end, and he could, usurp Mark Andrews as Andrews starts to age out. Now, let's be done with the breaking news. Let's move on to my coming in clutch or Fudge players of the week. We're going to start with my coming in clutch quarterback of the week. It's going to be Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. He's at Dallas to face off the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas secondary cannot guard to save their lives. There were so many miscommunications this season. There have been so many misreads this season by the Dallas secondary. It's been an absolute disaster so far this year for their defense. And their defensive line without Micah Parsons has been struggling a bit as well, giving quarterbacks more time to throw the football and pick apart this weaker secondary. Jordan Love, we know he can chuck it. Jordan Love, we know he can throw a lot of touchdowns. We saw him lead the league in touchdowns just a couple of years ago. We saw that upside for him. And I think this is a matchup where you're going to want to throw, you want to score a lot of points. And could the Packers lead this game by a lot? Because with Dallas without CeeDee Lamb, it could be a confusing offense. They could, but they're eventually going to get to the point where they're leading by a lot. And I think that's going to be through the arm of Jordan Love. I think he throws at least 2 touchdowns this week, and he's a very, very solid start as a QB1. Now, headed to the running back position, I'm going to look at J.K. Dobbins. He was a bench for me last week against a tough Chargers run defense. That didn't really work out for me. The J.K. Dobbins revenge narrative worked out for him. The Chargers sold on defense. after being so well in the first 3 weeks. But Dobbins is a start for me this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. He looks great, man. I mean, he simply looks really, really good. Totally tearing it up for Denver. RJ Harvey, he's keeping him off the field. And Harvey has not hit 35% of snaps so far. He has not hit 10 opportunities in a single game. That's rush attempts and targets combined. Dobbins has been the clear-cut RB1, and the Cincinnati defense has been bottom 6 in every single week so far in fantasy points allowed to the running back. Not bottom 6 overall in the season, but bottom 6 in every single week. They have not had a good game against a running game. And now with Jake Browning as the starting quarterback, this offense looking very messy. I expect Denver, even though they're 1-2, even though they've had a hard time winning games this season, I expect them to lead this one and be running the football a lot and close out this game running the football. So J.K. Dobbins is a must start, in my opinion, in most fantasy leagues this week. Now, Matthew Golden is my wide receiver coming in clutch wide receiver of the week. I'm stacking with Jordan Love. I think this is a Matthew Golden breakout week. I talked about it last week, our last episode on Tuesday, talking about Matthew Golden as a player that I think could have a huge breakout because we slowly started to see the snaps go up. 48% in week 1, 50% in week 2, 71% in week 3. We saw 4 catches, 50-plus yards in week 3 after very limited usage in week 1 and 2. You usually start to see a slow ramp up for rookies, and all of a sudden they have a crazy breakout. I mentioned some examples before. We've seen it this year with a few rookies. Like, this is going to be a potential breakout game for Golden against a really weak Dallas secondary. And if you're in betting, I'm seeing early lines of his receiving line at 37.5 yards. I think that's a ridiculously low line. I'm taking the over there by a mile. He just had 53 yards this last week on 4 receptions, and we know the explosive ability that he has downfield. I think that's a huge smash play if you're in the betting world. And now looking lastly at my tight end, coming in clutch tight end of the week, I'm looking at Jake Ferguson as a player you absolutely have to start. Actually, hold on. I'm plugging my phone real quick because I use my phone for my camera and my phone's starting to die because I didn't plug it in earlier. So now we got it plugged in. Let's do this again. My tight end coming in clutch player this week is going to be Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. He's the current league leader in tight end targets. He's had double-digit targets in each of the last 2 weeks. And with Lamb out, this is a huge opportunity for Jake Ferguson. Now, look, I don't expect this offense to be potent in week against the Green Bay Packers defense. But what I do expect is the Packers defense to put a lot of pressure on Dak Prescott and force him to dump off the football. We saw last week multiple times against Chicago. Chicago was faking blitzes. They were putting all these guys in line, and then Dak Prescott would see that and immediately just dump off to Jake Ferguson, even if they didn't send a blitz. When they're sending blitzes, when they're pretending to blitz, when they're showing blitz, Dak is looking for his safety blanket, and that is Jake Ferguson. That's why we've seen a hyper amount of targets over the last few weeks. And I expect Green Bay with Micah Parsons to put some serious pressure on Dak, and as a result, get him dumping off the football to his target in Jake Ferguson. So I don't think it's going to be, this like 100-yard game or anywhere near that for Jake Ferguson. I think we see at least 5 to 7 catches, and as a result, you're going to be happy for PPR purposes in fantasy football. Now, looking at my Fudge players of the week, my Fudge quarterback this week, it's ironic. I just talked about Jake Ferguson as a start. I'm benching Dak Prescott. I don't feel good about Dak heading into this week. The only reason I see Dak doing well this week is if we see a couple garbage time touchdowns late in the game or they fall behind, they seriously have to throw, and we see a lot of volume as a result. But it's not going to be good this week for this offense. With CeeDee Lamb out, it just completely changes the way this offense functions. George Pickens has not looked great so far this year. Jake Ferguson has been fine as a safety blanket. And Javonte Williams out of the passing game is fine. But without CeeDee Lamb, this offense completely is dismantled. I don't think Dak Prescott is going to be able to put up numbers that we want out of a fantasy quarterback this week. So far, he's the QB 18 on the year. And Green Bay is averaging under 12 points per game to the quarterback position and 4-point passing touchdown scoring. Like, Dak without any mobility is just not a player I want because you're banking on touchdowns. You're banking on extreme passing yardage. And against a Green Bay defense that can play really, really well and limit the quarterback position, I just don't see Dak getting to those kind of numbers. I see him throwing 1 touchdown. I see him barely getting over 200 yards. I'm out on Dak this week. Now, running back, Fudge player of the week is going to be Nick Chubb, Houston Texans running back against the Tennessee Titans. He has not hit 8 PPR points without a score this season. He had 1 game with a touchdown. That was the only time he hit 8 PPR points. Woody Marks has gotten very involved in this backfield. 17%, 28%, and then 49% of the snaps in week 3. He's gotten some more and more touches. And the Houston offense is being a complete disaster so far this year. So I see Chubb as a player. You're getting limited volume, not much receiving work, and it's in a boring offense against a defense that's really, really solid. And look, Houston, Tennessee, these are two poor offenses, two really good defenses matching up against one another. This is going to be a low scoring contest. Like, I would not be surprised at all if the score at the end of this game is like 13-9. Like, the over under is 38.5 points. I think that's too high. Like, if I'm a betting man, I'm taking the under there. And I don't see this game getting many touchdowns. And as a result, Chubb, I see him getting like 10 attempts, 39 yards, 10 attempts, 42 yards, maybe a couple catches, but no touchdown. As a result, you're to get like 7 points out of him. And that's just not a game I want out of my running back in my RB2 or flex spot. So get Nick Chubb out of your lineups if you can. Now, wide receiver this week for me is DK Metcalf, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers, headed to Minnesota to face off the Vikings. Or no, I think it's at home against the Vikings. 17 targets this year in 3 games, only 10 receptions. The Steelers are not using DK Metcalf as a pure wide receiver one. A lot of his routes, the vast majority, in terms of percentage of his routes, lots of slants and lots of goes and lots of fades. It's not a alpha wide receiver one. It's more of a deep cut and slant kind of player, just primarily just playing on the outside, doing that outside kind of role. And it's kind of what the Eagles were doing with AJ Brown for a minute in those first couple of games, where they just kept putting him on slants all game long and just trying to get those short passes and then barely sometimes setting him downfield. The Steelers are just setting him downfield, setting him on slants, and not being creative enough with him to get him wide receiver one levels of usage. And as a result, we're seeing not wide receiver one levels of fantasy points. He's currently like the wide receiver 32 on the season. He's had a couple touchdowns, which saved his fantasy value. But against a Minnesota defense that is dead last in fantasy points allowed to outside wide receivers this year, they're locked down to the secondary. I just don't see a great game coming from Metcalf in this one. So I'm out. I'm just out on DK Metcalf overall right now. I'm not feeling good about him. And against a really tough matchup with Minnesota, I'm really out. Now let's head to the tight end position. My bench here is going to be Chigakonkwo, Tennessee Titans tight end against the Houston Texans. I've seen some streaming conversations about Chigakonkwo because over the last 2 weeks, he's had 4+ catches, specifically going 5 for 66 last week. With Calvin Ridley not really showing up, the Tennessee Titans have looked elsewhere for their number 1 and 2 targets, and Chigakonkwo and Alec Aomanor have really shown up. And I don't think Chig has the week people want him to this week. I expect a low-scoring game, like I mentioned with Nick Chubb. Houston, Tennessee is likely going to be a low-scoring game, likely not going to be a high-volume game. And as a result, I just don't think we're going to see Tennessee Titans tight end Chigakonkwo be very, very involved in this game. I see 3 catches, 36 yards. He hasn't had any red zone targets this year. They're looking elsewhere in the red zone. So I'm out on Chigakonkwo this week. All right, that's it for my coming in clutch and Fudge players of the week. Let's head into the listener Q&A. We got 4 questions to go through. Let's roll right through them. DJ Moore or Ricky Pearsall in a PPR format? Now, looking at this question, I think it's a really good one. Really tough flex question here. I think I'm going to go with Ricky Pearsall. He's had multiple 100-yard games on the year, and the rest of the receivers in San Francisco are still dealing with injury. You have Brock Purdy coming back. I like the matchup here with Jacksonville, a defense that hasn't been hot this year. I'm looking at Ricky Pearsall as the play here. And now looking at DJ Moore, I'm feeling not so good about him right now. Roma Dunze is the clear-cut wide receiver one in Chicago right now. Luther Burns making big plays. We saw 3 catches last week, 101 yards on a touchdown on the flea flicker catch that we saw from him from Caleb. That was a great trick play. And we're seeing Colson Loveland get involved. That's something we'll talk about in a minute. DJ Moore is just being a boring wide receiver 2 in this offense. Not wide receiver 2 for fantasy. He's barely a wide receiver 4 for fantasy right now. But he's being a boring wide receiver 2 for this offense, where he's getting just enough targets to stay somewhat relevant, but he has scored no more than 12.5 points in PPR in a single game this year. Like, he's kind of just been floating right around 8 to 12 points, and it's okay, but I see much more potential on Ricky Pearsall, who can make big plays downfield. Now, looking at Cam Scatterbo or Quinshawn Judkins is the next question in a PPR format. I'm looking at Cam Scatterbo as the play here. Now, I think Quinshawn Judkins is the more talented player. I think he's the better option in terms of a running back. However, I'm looking at Cam Scatterbo as the better play in fantasy because, one, we know the rushing volumes there with Town Tracy out. We know that there were Judkins too, but the receiving volumes there's a difference here. Cam Scatterbo was used heavily in the receiving game over the last couple weeks. Quinshawn Judkins is solid as a receiver, but I don't see him getting more than like 2 to 3 catches per game. Cam Scatterbo, we've seen much more than that out of him. We've seen so far some serious receiving involvement. And what do we know about a rookie quarterback? Safety blankets are great. And Cam Scatterbo, as a big physical back who can make some plays after the catch, that's kind of what he is. He's a safety blanket that can get in the flat and get some catches there for Jackson Dart when he's under pressure against a really solid LAC defense. I'm looking at Cam Scotty, it was a great start. He looks really good with the football in his hands, and he's getting receiving involvement. Now, let's head to the next question. This is a trade question. Who should I trade for before this week ends? Before week 4, who should I be trading for? Now, if you want to make any last-second trades in your fantasy league, I think Matthew Golden's a great choice. I talked about how he's my big play of the week, coming in clutch, wide receiver of the week this week. I think he's fantastic. And we talked about that on Tuesday too. But something I hadn't talked about on Tuesday that I think is really worth trading for because he's injured right now, but he should play this week. And I really saw the involvement early in the game before he got knocked out. It's Colson Loveland. He's flashed on his catches so far this year. He's only had a couple, but he's flashed on them. And then looking at the involvement we saw in week 3, he only played about 10% of the snaps, but he had 3 targets. He got knocked out early in the game, but he was very, very involved, and he was becoming a clear-cut option in this offense. I see Colson Loveland as a player where, obviously, look, he's a rookie tight end. Might take a couple weeks to get going, but we saw that little flash, and he is dead cheap right now in fantasy football. I know some people who want to drop him because they draft him to be their starting tight end, and he is not providing that kind of value. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's on the end of people's benches or maybe even on waiver wires. So go see what you can get from the Colson Loveland manager. I would try and make that trade right now if you can before week 4, before he potentially breaks out and has a big, big game, because at that point, he's going to be off the table for trades. Now, Trey Benson, immediately locked in as a start for Thursday Night Football against Seattle. What are we thinking here for Trey Benson? I think he absolutely is a locked-in start. I think you have to play him as an RB2. I wouldn't see many teams that would bench Trey Benson this week unless you're in like an 8-man league. Trey Benson should be started in pretty much every fantasy league this week. He's going to get the bulk of the rushing work. I expect a few catches as well. And against a defense in Seattle that hasn't been the best this year overall on the year, I think Benson should have a really solid game. He's got fresh leg. He's got juice. He's young. He's explosive. We know he can make huge plays. We've already seen multiple 30-plus yard rushes this year. I am fully in on Trey Benson as a great RB2 play this week with confidence. And now that's it for the Q&A. We're going to jump into the over-unders for the week. We're bringing on Joey Wright. See y'all soon. All right, everybody, we are back, and we have brought on a friend. Please welcome on Mr. Joey Wright. He's at the Joey Wright on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. He's a fellow colleague over at Football Guys, the community ambassador over there. Please welcome on Joey Wright to the show. How are you doing, man? You ready for this Eagles-Bucks game this weekend?
You know, you asked me to come on the show, and it just happened to be you wanted me to come on last week, but I wasn't available because I'm such a busy person and I'm like famous and stuff now. Like I think my kids had something going on. But it's kismet that you have me come on the week that our two teams play and the week that my team loses to your team, most likely.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, the theme this week, you kind of spoiled, we kind of hinted at a little bit. The theme this week for the over-unders is going to be all the Eagles-Bucks game, because obviously I'm an Eagles fan. Joey's a Bucks fan. We got our two teams matched, headed up. So why not just talk about this game this weekend? So we're going to start with Jalen Hurts, Joey. So in 2 straight games, he was under 160 passing yards. Really bad for this Eagles offense in terms of the passing game, but the Eagles were pulling out wins. But last week we saw against the Los Angeles Rams, especially in that second half, Jalen Hurts was able to put the passing game together. We talked about pre-recording. They actually have A.J. Brown now on the Eagles offense. So Jalen Hurts' passing prop, based on different sites that I've seen, the over-under I'm putting for this line is 178.5 passing yards. So he had 226 last week, but was under 160 in weeks 1 and 2. Now we go against the Tampa Bay secondary that's been overall questionable on the season. What do we think about Jalen Hurts for 178.5 passing yards?
Well, I think questionable is a nice thing to say because last year it was extremely questionable.
It was so bad last year.
It was really, really bad last season. This season, it's looked a little bit better. That one, you said 178?
178.5. What do we think?
Oh, man. I mean, it's Swiss cheese. I don't know if it's that Swiss cheese. I could see him hitting 170 pretty easily. Because he's averaging 160 a game this season. I'm going to actually go the over because I do think if the Bucks are going to win this game, they're going to have to throw. The Bucks are actually pretty decent at stopping the run. I think the tush push will always succeed. But as far as Saquon Barkley, maybe I don't know if that's another question coming up. But I think the way to beat the Bucks is through the air. So, yeah, we'll go over Jalen Hurts, 178.
Yeah, honestly, it's really tough for me because with Mike Evans out on the Bucs side and with how both these offenses have played overall in the season, I think this could be a lower scoring game. You have obviously the Eagles defense looking pretty well, and that would promote Jalen Hurts to be under on this mark. But I think there's no way they see what happened in the second half of last week and don't
Mhm.
carry that momentum into this week against a questionable Tampa Bay secondary. I think I'm going to take the over here on Hurts 178.5. Even if it's a low volume game, one play and Hurts could get really close to this. Like Hurts at 178.5, that's a really low number. If it was more like 200, I'd be tempted to take the under, but 178.5 is his current projection. I'm going to take the over. So let's talk about Emeka Ibuka. Let's talk about the rookie wide receiver for the Bucs. I see Joey smiling. So
Yeah.
Mike Evans is out this week. Obviously, Chris Godwin still isn't back. Jalen McMillan's still hurt. So it looks like Emeka Ibuka is going to be the wide receiver one of this offense. I'm putting his over under for receptions here at 5.5. What do we think for Emeka Ibuka at 5.5 receptions against this Eagles defense?
Whether or not Chris Godwin is on the field, I think he's going to crush 5.5 this week. I would actually go to alternate line and go as high as 8 for him. I think this offense is going to flow through him next week or this weekend. I am not shying away from 5.5. If you would have said 7.5, I would have thought about it. But with Mike Evans not there, Chris Godwin on his first game back, I think Godwin will be more of a decoy if he is back. Kate Otton's going to work out of the slot. I think Ibuka is our best option on the outside right now. So I would crush that 5.5. And I'm writing these down because I am going to parlay this.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the over here as well at 5.5. I think this is I think this is a short line as well. I was looking around and I was tempted to move it to like 6, 7.5 receptions, and I was like, I want to follow what DraftKings and what the football guys projections, Fantasy Pros projections, all these guys projections are saying, and just that's because that's usually what I do for these lines. I look around in the industry and saying, what are people saying this guy's going to do this week? And they were the 5.5 was about the line, so I'm putting it 5.5. I'm going to take the over here as well. I'm agreeing with you. I think they're going to flow through him this week. The Eagles secondary, while we do have Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean's there, they got some holes on that secondary. It's been a little weird this year for the Eagles on that secondary after losing Isaiah Rodgers and Darius Slay this offseason. Now, let's look at Dallas Goedert. He had 7 receptions in week 1, missed week 2, and there was kind of a decoy in week 3, 2 targets, 1 reception. Tampa Bay overall on the year is just right in the middle of the pack in terms of fantasy points allowed, in terms of receptions allowed to the tight end position. So do we think Goddard is involved again? I'm going to go 3.5 receptions for the over-under here for you, Joey. What do we think for Goddard this week?
Oh, that's a really good line. I maybe it's just the tight end position in general. Whenever they return from an injury, I always give them a game to come back before we see them kind of return to form. And maybe that's just like a pattern I've fallen into. So Goddard not performing last week doesn't shock me too much after missing week 2.
Yeah.
3.5. He's getting about almost 5 targets a game this season. I'll take I don't like taking unders. Unders are not fun because you have to watch the whole game. But if you take the over, you can hit the over in the first half and then you don't got to watch anymore. Yeah, I'm going to take the over on Dallas Goedert. I think he is a big part of this offense. Now they've got AJ Brown going. Devontae Smith is always going to get targets and always going to get receptions, but the field's opening up more. I could see Goddard easily getting 4 receptions in this game.
Yeah, I could too. And Joey, I love your point about the unders conversation. I recently did a bet this weekend or a couple weeks ago. It was a Quentin Johnson line. It was 3.5 receptions, and I think it was the Raiders they were playing, and the Raiders play a lot of zone, and Quentin Johnson's not a zone beater. So we were like, okay, all the props bets people, me and Sam and a bunch of people in the props betting channel were like under 3.5 receptions for Quentin Johnson. In basically the whole entire first half, he had nothing. We were all so excited. And there was like an 8-minute stretch, like right in between the two halves, where he had 3 receptions. And it was like, well, we're done. It's over. Like, we're going to lose this one. And somehow, some way, he did not get a reception for the entire rest of the game. And it hit. He stayed at 3 receptions. But it was like, I was sweating during that whole game just watching, because Quentin Johnson got a couple targets and he was open on a couple plays. And it was just like screaming at the TV, just don't throw it in his direction. It was kind of hilarious. I hate taking unders too. I am always looking for overs because it's so much more fun to bet on a player than bet against a player. But
100%.
in this scenario, I think I'm going to disagree with you and make it fun for us this week to see who wins this contest. I'm going to take the under just barely because I think he literally gets a 3 this week. The only problem with the over at 4, I just think that we see Devontae Smith and AJ Brown get very involved this week, and I think we see hyper targeting to those 2 players. And yes, Goddard's probably going to be healthier this week, but if we're seeing a ton of targets go to those 2 players and the Eagles are consolidating their offense there, Goddard, we've seen that before where he's so inconsistent receptions wise. And against the Bucs defense, that's not necessarily weak against the tight end position. They're worse on the secondary against wide receivers. I'm going to take the under, and I'm going to say he hits 3, and he's going to make me sweat.
Yeah, over the middle of the field, Bucs aren't bad at all. So
no, they're not bad.
This was the one that I had to think about a little bit more. I had to kind of think, but the other two, like those were smash overs for me. But
I agree.
All in line with the overs this week.
Let's go. All right, Joey, that's going to be it for these little props. Thank you so much for playing with us. We'll see how the results go through the show. And I told you pre-show, we got some pressure on you, man. There have been no guests that have hit 2 of 3 yet. So pressure's on, man. How you feeling about these 3?
I feel good about these 3. You told me that Barron's only got 1. And I mean, I think I can beat Andy pretty easily at pretty much any type of a contest. So yeah, I'm here for it. Come on, Barron's. Let's go.
And if you're listening, challenge accepted, man. Challenge accepted. Let's get it. So, Joey, before we wrap up this segment, please tell people where they can find you over at Football Guys and all your content, what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm over at Football Guys. I'm the community ambassador. I'm hanging out in the Discord. I'm hanging out in the forums, driving the community. We got the Football Guys Bowl. We're into week 4 now, heading into it, looking like a tight ship there. Everything's going good. Let me see. Who do I want to promote? I don't like promoting myself anymore. I mean, I'm working hard. Jeff Blaylock, he did the Sunday morning AMA last weekend for the first time, and he knocked it out of the park. I say he did it for the first time. This is the first time he was assigned it. Before that, he would just go in there and do it. So excited to see him getting involved in there. I know, Hutch, you've been in there. I love our whole team, and I like shouting them out just as much as I shout myself out.
Yeah, man. I mean, I do it every week on the show is shout out Football Guys. Like, I mean, because obviously I do my work over there too. But man, I love the Football Guys team, man. I think we do fantastic work. And if you're looking for fantasy football advice, you're looking for a site to follow, Football Guys is the one that I would promote to every single person that would ever ask me. Go to footballguys.com, man. But thank you, Joey, so much for coming on the show. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Hutch Coming in Clutch. Greatly appreciate you. We will see you all next week on Tuesday with all the headlines, takeaways, and reactions to week 4. It's going to be a fun week 4. And best of luck in your fantasy football matchups this week. We have some serious injuries heading in this week. We have some questionable situations, some really fun games. So it'll be quite an exciting fantasy football weekend. See y'all next week.